Good morning and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. It's really quite lovely outside here. I've heard the birds chirruping all morning. And indeed, it's really very sunny. I trust you're all well and that your family and your loved ones are safe as well. Let me start with a short video I did on Monday, which was speaking to what I see as a spillover moment. I think developed markets, with the exception of the UK and the US, but essentially the trend is now lower for now. Obviously, if they open up precipitously, we'll see something different. But I was talking about the spillover effect we're seeing into emerging markets. And there was a lot of optimism that Africa would not be hit. I disavow that optimism. I think it's completely bogus. And I'll get to my reasons why momentarily. Let me start with some macro thoughts, going back to Stanley Druckenmiller, who, as always, gave it, probably the most direct speaker and the most articulate and sophisticated reader of the markets, in my opinion. I don't see why anybody would change their behavior because there's a viral drug out there. And I think that's an important point, and that's what I was trying to get to when I said we're in the realm of behavioral economics here. Driving in the US is virtually back to pre-COVID levels, judging by Apple Maps driving directions requests, and it's fully recovered in Georgia. Meanwhile, it's barely picked up from the lows in the United Kingdom, Spain, or Italy. That's from Torsten Slock at Deutsche Bank. Interesting detail. Druckenmiller again looking for a V-shaped economic recovery, not so fast. As I said previously, a V-shaped recovery is a fantasy. And the virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, which is something that the chairman seems to have admitted yesterday, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved as we speak. There's been a lot of debate about negative interest rates in the United States, and I'm increasingly thinking it's inevitable, and it probably takes a maximum of 10 more tweets of the browbeating nature from POTUS for Chairman Powell to go NERP. You just know that a few more really soft inflation prints, there will be a random Fed president who believes even near zero that policy is too tight, tweeted Faro TV. They'll suggest 10 basis points and then they'll be propped up against a bar telling everyone it can work with some well thought out tiering. And what's certain is that the whole global economy has been hit by an insidious, literally invisible circuit breaker. And we're seeing that in the data points that are being released, whether it was the United Kingdom, Europe. Home thoughts, it is estimated that as few as 1,000 SARS-CoV-2 viral particles are needed for an infection to take hold. Remember that, just 1,000. If a person coughs or sneezes, those 200 million viral particles go everywhere. That was Erin Bromage. So just to give you a sense of how dangerous somebody sneezing could be. Highlight, pajama sales are up 143%, says Adobe's John T. Copeland to Yahoo Finance. That's indeed the way we live now, isn't it? Everything is barely weeks, everything is days, we have minutes to live, said Don DeLillo. And I came across this from Black Plaques. London 350 years ago, and here's your choice of endings. and have a look at those choices, because it speaks to a similar issue today. As I said, in my last article, I was quoting the wonderful Albert Camus. They fancied themselves free. And no one will ever be free so long as there are pestilences. In this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, wrapped up in themselves. In other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore, we tell ourselves that a pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. But it doesn't always pass away, and from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away, and the humanists first of all, because they have taken no precautions. And then Gilgamesh, no one at all sees death. No one at all sees the face of death. No one at all hears the voice of death. Death so savage who hacks men down. And I was reading this book, The Hot Zone, a hot virus from the rainforest lives within a 24-hour plane flight from every city on Earth. All of the Earth's cities are connected by a web of airline routes. The web is a network. Once a virus hits the net, it can shoot anywhere in a day. It's really a very good book, Hot Zone. And then last night I was watching a fantastic documentary, Land of the Tiger. The link is on Rich Wrap-Ups if you fancy a little detour. Political reflections. Secret Chinese military data adds new detail to coronavirus reporting. This is from 100 Reporters. Beijing claims that since the coronavirus pandemic began at the end of last year, there have been only 82,919 confirmed cases and 4,633 deaths in mainland China. Those numbers could be roughly accurate, says this article, but absolutely not. I've done some modeling, and clearly this is not the case. And in that case, a detailed account would be an important tool in judging the spread of the virus. But it's also possible that the numbers presented to the rest of the world are vastly understated compared to Beijing's private figures. The opaqueness and mistrust of outsiders in the Chinese Communist Party's system makes it hard to judge. But learning more about the coronavirus data used directly by Chinese officials is invaluable for governments elsewhere. A data set of coronavirus cases and deaths from the military's National University of Defense Technology, leaked to 100 Reporters, offers insight into how Beijing has gathered coronavirus data on its population. The source of the leak, who asked to remain anonymous because of the sensitivity of sharing Chinese military data, said that the data came from the university. The school publishes a data tracker for the coronavirus. The online version matches with the leaked information, except it is far less detailed. It shows just the map of cases, not the distinct data. There are more than 640,000 updates of information covering at least 230 cities. In other words, 640,000 rows purporting to show the number of cases in a specific location at the time the data was gathered. Each update includes the latitude, longitude, and confirmed number of cases at the location for dates ranging from early February to late April. For locations in and around the center of the outbreak in Wuhan, Hubei province, the data also includes figures for deaths and for those who recovered. The data reviewed by 100 reporters included hospital locations, but it also includes place names corresponding to apartment compounds, hotels, supermarkets, railway stations, restaurants, and schools across the breadth of the country. So it'll be interesting to see what that data points at, but clearly, the caseload that they have published is way below the actual number. What is clear, as I wrote a few months ago, is that the CCP suppressed information. And I said, until we reached a Groucho Marx, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes moment? But they still haven't been transparent. 16th of February, I was saying a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine. In point of fact, I was writing that about China on the 16th of February, but it could apply to the United States. It could apply to many countries. Magufuli, Bolsonaro, Stephen McDonnell with social media posts about the coronavirus being censored in China. Here's a bit of cool protest art going around. Zhu Zhangrun, they now turn to rule over the people by means of what could be dubbed big data totalitarianism and WeChat terror. I call that the algorithmic society. And therefore, the coronavirus represents non-linear and exponential risks. Very interesting response statement of Rick Bright, PhD, Scientific Integrity in the COVID-19 Response. This will be published around the same time you get to watch the podcast. I am Dr. Rick Bright, a career public servant and a scientist who has spent 25 years of my career focused on addressing pandemic outbreaks. On April 21st, I was removed from my position as the director of BARDA and HHS Deputy Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response by HHS leadership and involuntarily transferred to a more limited and less impactful position at the National Institutes of Health. I believe this transfer was in response to my insistence that the government invest funding allocated to BARDA by Congress to address the COVID-19 pandemic into safe and scientifically vetted solutions and not in drugs, vaccines, and other technologies that lack scientific merit. I spoke out then, and I'm testifying today because science, not politics or cronyism, must lead the way to combat this deadly virus. And that point he's making applies worldwide. The world is confronting a great public health emergency which has the potential to eclipse the devastation wrought by the 1918 influenza, which globally claimed over 50 million lives. We face a highly transmissible and deadly virus which not only claims lives but is also disrupting the very foundation of our societies. Our population is being paralyzed by fear, behavioral economics, stemming from the lack of a coordinated response and a dearth of accurate, clear communication about the path forward. In January, February, and March 2020, I pushed HHS to ramp up US production of masks, respirators, and other critical supplies, such as medicine, syringes, and swabs. Again, my urgency was dismissed and I was cut out of high-level meetings to combat COVID-19. And finally, when I resisted efforts to promote and enable broad access to an unproven drug, chloroquine, to the American people without transparent information on the potential health risks, I was removed from BARDA. Without clear planning and implementation of the steps that I and other experts have outlined, 2020 will be the darkest winter in modern history. First and foremost, we need to be truthful with the American people. They want the truth. They can handle the truth. Some of the leaders can't. Truth, no matter how unpleasant, decreases the fear generated by uncertainty. The truth must be based on scientific evidence and not filtered for political reasons. I take you back to Jenna Friedman's comment to reality TV star botched the response to a global pandemic, and now we're all imprisoned in our homes and forced to watch him daily. And this could apply to the Chinese or the Americans. What is thriving, however, is all that ridiculous red culture and nauseating adulation that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. Take you back to Pelagius, the virus may be the most dangerous adversary America has ever faced. It's actually an existential and deconstructionist adversary. It's like the US was invaded, the normal defenses fail, it can't be bombed, bank accounts can't be frozen, unbreakable morale, no supply chain lives off the land, infinite reinforcements, fully decentralized. As I said, to watch the daily briefing is to understand that the control machine has a novice, a hubristic Narcissus in charge of the console. 24th of March or February, I was writing that the Gladwell moment has definitively arrived. Remy GMI, who now puts out his data points once a week on Wednesday, there are 2.5 million active cases, more than 85,000 cases confirmed on a 7-day average. 10th of May, I was saying we're trending in the 80,000 to 100,000 COVID cases a day now. I suspect we're considerably higher because we're seeing a lot of growth in the emerging and frontier markets, which I addressed over the weekend. I called it COVID-19 and the spillover moment. South America is now the hotspot with Brazil. This is Remy again. Brazil's coronavirus cases passed Germany's as Bolsonaro fights to open gyms. Brazil's confirmed cases of the novel coronavirus passed Germany on Tuesday as Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro fought states over his wish to reopen gyms and beauty parlors, even as his country becomes a new global hotspot for the pandemic. Brazil has now confirmed, that was yesterday, 177,589 cases since its outbreak began in late February, passing Germany's 170,508 confirmed cases and drawing nearly even with France's tally of 178,225 confirmed and probable cases. But a lot of people think this is a massive undercount. Brazil recorded its deadliest day yet with 881 confirmed deaths in 24 hours. Bolsonaro is walking toward the precipice and wants to take all of us with him, Rio de Janeiro Governor Wilson Witzel said on Twitter. Sources tell Reuters the government will soon slash its 2020 economic outlook dramatically, predicting a more than 4% drop in GDP, down from a prior forecast for flat growth. The real is again at a record low. Brazil's health ministry have confirmed 12,400 deaths from the virus as of Tuesday. A coronavirus mortality model from the University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation predicts over 88,000 deaths from the coronavirus in Brazil by August. I said in my article, Brazil is the global epicenter of the coronavirus. I said in Brazil we have a toxic mix of a voodoo president, Bolsonaro, and a runaway COVID-19. You remember he said, Brazilians aren't infected by anything, even when they fall into a sewer. It's tragic surrealism. I can't stop thinking about Gabriel Garcia Marquez when I think about the situation Manaus is facing. The South American country has a population of 210 million. Viruses are in essence non-linear, exponential and multiplicative, and COVID-19 has escape velocity, I'm afraid, in Brazil. The real touched a record low of 5.88 on May 7th and will break 6 in short order. And it is a real-time laboratory experiment, and the African Bolsonaro is, of course, John Pombe Magufuli, and I'll get to him. There are nearly 700,000 confirmed cases within emerging markets. Video for me, more than 5% growth, Pakistan, Chile, Qatar, Bangladesh, Colombia, South Africa, Kuwait, Bahrain, Ghana, Afghanistan, Bolivia, Guinea, Honduras, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Sudan, Somalia, Guatemala, DRC and Mayotte, and that's the spillover I was talking about. Russia, of course, adding more than 10,000 daily cases for the past 10 days. And interestingly, there was an explosion at a biological facility in the fourth quarter of last year in Russia. And that's why there's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It is the sum total of the things they aren't telling us. Viruses do exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and that's evidenced in a great article again by Thomas Puyo. And in that article, he's got some great research into super spreading events, and he looks at the service at the Shincheonji Church. A single patient, patient 31, caused over 5,000 cases. At this church, thousands of people sit close to each other for long periods of time, forbidden to wear eyeglasses or masks, singing and praying loudly. The church doesn't allow them to miss the service even if they are sick. That's why patient 31 went 2 Sundays in a row to a service while sick. And that is the viral moment. Turning to the currency markets, we're seeing a lot of dollar strength right now. The dollar index is at 100.334. Euro dollar has just broken 108. Japanese yen 106.88. British pound 121.82, so that's weak as well. The real right at that record low 5.88, and the rand has also softened to 18.57. I'm of the view we'll see further strength in the dollar. Euro dollar, as I said, has dipped below 108. In my article on the weekend, I said tourism, I believe, is stopped out all the way through Q4 2021. I think business travel is toast. And on that point, have a look at this tweet from The Economist. Please check in your baggage so it can be disinfected. TUI Group says it is looking to cut 8,000 roles worldwide, calling COVID-19 the greatest crisis the industry has faced. Seychelles bans cruise ships for 2 years over COVID-19 fears. I wouldn't get on a cruise ship, though I saw there was some special offer by Carnival Cruises, which was well taken up. In nautical limbo, where the clusters of cruise ships sit idle with crews still on board, In the past few weeks, Manila Bay in the Philippines has been transformed into the world's biggest parking lot for cruise ships, none of which have any guests. Around the world, cruise ship operators are finding places to anchor their enormous vessels, with hundreds of crew on board. Crew told Reuters they were bored, lonely or frustrated being so close to home, but felt fortunate to be confined to their cabins in comfort, knowing that thousands of Philippine returnees are in tougher quarantine conditions elsewhere. Each person is staying in a suite room. We feel like the guests now, joked Michael Torralbe Martinez, speaking from one of the cabins that he normally cleans. Data from ship tracking website Marine Traffic showed 378 cruise ships globally on May 8. Some of the ships were underway at sea, but many were moored in clusters around the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, Atlantic Ocean, and the South China Sea. And that's essentially what I mean about moving from a world of hyper-connectedness to a world of quarantine. Fishermen sailed past a group of cruise ships anchored in Manila, Philippines. That's May 8. And as I said, we're in the realms of behavioral economics. Who's to know whether people will be keen on going on a cruise ship? I wouldn't. Gold, 1718 now, and I think that liftoff, we've been stalled around here for a good month, but it feels to me as if the liftoff is coming. Paul Tudor Jones on CNBC, gold is going substantially higher, store of value for 2,500 years, taking out the peaks of the 70s and 80s, he said. Production growth of bullion is 1% annually, while the Fed is creating money supply at a 30% pace. 24th of February, I said the viral moment has arrived, and I was venturing that gold is correlated to the coronavirus, which I said is set to turn parabolic and is already non-linear and exponential. 22nd of March, I said gold will soon turn viral to the upside, and I'm looking for more than $2,000. Crude oil, where is that? That's at $26.11. Had quite a stunning recovery when you think about it. Sub-Saharan Africa, I like this map of population density for the continent of Africa from under the radar. Again, in my weekend article, I was talking about regime implosion risk in Sub-Saharan Africa is trending higher. I think I concluded by saying Africa will go Juche, which is the North Korean ideology of self-reliance. This is the confirmed cases in Africa, daily confirmed cases from Our World in Data. Remy GMI, Africa has now reported more than 45,000 confirmed cases. I think he's referencing Sub-Saharan Africa. As I said on the 2nd of March, we know coronavirus is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative. And we know that exponential disease propagation looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. As I said, the African Jair Bolsonaro is, of course, John Pombe Magufuli. Just to reference some of the points, WHO warned of 190,000 deaths in Africa and said the pandemic could smolder in Africa for several years. Should the various lockdowns currently being eased in many African countries fail to bend the curve, between 29 million and 44 million Africans risk being infected, with deaths potentially reaching 190,000. WHO believe that transmissions will likely be slower because of Africa's age pyramid and social and environmental factors, but that the pandemic risks lasting for far longer. They also said it won't spread exponentially in Africa as it has elsewhere. It will likely smolder in transmission hotspots, and saying we need to test, trace, isolate, and treat. However, clearly, as I was noting, there are transmission hotspots. Kano in Nigeria, Western Cape is growing at an alarming rate. You can't get a hospital bed in Dar es Salaam and many parts of Tanzania. And I was asking, the question for Sub-Saharan Africa is whether these transmission hotspots expand and conflate, and I think they will. State Department, US State Department, in a highly unusual move, has issued a Global 4 health advisory. This was via the US Embassy in Tanzania. The risk of contracting COVID-19 in Dar es Salaam is extremely high, they said. All evidence points to exponential growth. Tanzanian government has not released any data on COVID in Tanzania since April 29, so there are no current data on the number of people diagnosed with COVID-19 in Tanzania. They've issued a global level 4 health advisory. Risk of contracting COVID-19 in Dar es Salaam is extremely high. Despite limited official reports, all evidence points to exponential growth of the pandemic in Dar and other locations in Tanzania. Many hospitals in Dar es Salaam have been overwhelmed in recent weeks. And then I had a friend ask me yesterday, is that not the future for the rest of Africa? Which is an open question. And therefore, the worrying development is transmission hotspots. The question for Sub-Saharan Africa is whether these transmission hotspots expand and conflate. As we said, Western Cape daily positive hit rate is 13.751%. That's really high. That was via slip catch. South Africa's yield curve steepened to a record in May as investors piled into shorter-end securities after the central bank cut its policy rate to a record low. In dollar terms, however, the bonds have been among the worst performers in emerging markets, and that goes back to what I was writing about in September 2019. And I called it the China Emerging Markets Frontier Feedback Loop phenomenon. I said this phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. The rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker of their commodities are at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. This pressure point, I said, will not ease soon, but will continue to intensify. South African All Share is down 12.14%, dollar rand at 18.57, Egyptian pound 15.75, EGX30 minus 25.54%, Nigerian All Share minus 11.67%, Ghana and Angola face substantial Eurobond repayments over the rest of 2020 via Sober Look and Adam 2s. And Angola is a very big worry. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index minus 9.48%. Watch this Reuters clip showing protests in Kampala after the November 1964 referendum on the lost counties. The vote decided whether Buganda or Bunyoro would control a region that both kingdoms claimed. When it went against Buganda, populist anger inspired opposition to Obote's government. Petrol price here in Nairobi had a precipitous fall, long delayed. This is from Robert Ngila. Here is a breakdown of how each shilling is spent per litre of fuel bought within Kenya. More than 50% is tax. Nation Media closed at 19 shillings and 10 cents. Its entire market capitalization is $35.77 million. Price earnings ratio is 4.48. At the time of the last results, I said, of course, the question is about the pivot. It is, after all, a Schumpeter level moment in this industry, and we're seeing that Schumpeter moment being accelerated globally because we're all in quarantine. Shilling is at 106.60 and headed lower. Nairobi All Shares minus 17.45%, and the NSE20 minus 24.79%. Thank you for listening, for which I am grateful.